This is an interview with Rabbi Levy in London on the 3rd of March 91, and I shall begin... 6th of March, oh, sorry. 6th of March, right. And I shall begin with basic personal data. Could you please give your birth date and place?
I was born in London in September 1910, so I'm over 80.
It's not for the interview.
No.
No, I mean, I could imagine it.
I know you can, that's all right. I wanted to surprise you. Yes, I was born in London in September 1910 in London, and I received my education in London. And I was the first Jewish chaplain to be commissioned at the outbreak of war in 1939.
Where did you study and receive the smicha?
In London. I studied at the Yeshiva Eitz Chaim and then at Jewish College.
And when was the smicha? About?
Well, I was about 25, about 1925.
Yeah. So you were already a chaplain, a rabbi.
Yes, I was in a community in London, 2 communities in London, and then at the outbreak of war, I volunteered to serve in the army, and I received my commission as an officer, and served in England, and from 1941 to 1944, I was in the Middle East. I was the chief chaplain for the armies of the Middle East, that is Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, right up to Tunisia. I came back to England just for a few weeks and went over to Europe. And I served in Belgium and Holland, and then we moved into Germany. And whilst I was in Germany, I heard that Belsen had been overrun. And within a few days of the liberation, I think on the 4th day of liberation, I went into Belsen.
Just a moment, I shall stop you now because I have a previous question about your Zionist activity before. When did you become a Zionist?
I was born into a Zionism. My father, I was suckled on Zionism. My father was a keen Zionist, and it was part of my blood. My father always used to talk about the meeting when he saw Theodor Herzl in London. These memories, and he used to take me to Zionist meetings. I used to go to meetings to hear Nachum Sokolov and all the others, the great Zionist leaders. And so my Zionism was very much part of my life, and always has been. And so when I went to Palestine, as it then was, I had 25,000 Palestinian Jews serving, we call them Palestinians those days, serving in the British Army. That rather improved my Hebrew, so I became bilingual as far as they were concerned. And I made very close connection with Moshe Sharet, became a very great personal friend. And I was involved with Aliyah Bet, but we don't talk about that. In that, whilst I was serving in the Western Desert, and we had these Palestinian units, we made very close contact with them. And I needn't tell you why. Because I used to travel backwards and forwards. It was possible for me to give a soldier a lift. And we've had Jews from North Africa who were put into army uniform and given an army papers. And I went to Palestine, I gave them a lift. And what happened then? Hashem, you're there. No more than that. So we don't discuss that, if you know what I mean. The British authorities never knew, and they didn't have to know. And then, of course, when I was brought back to England in 1944 for 3 weeks, and then I went over to Europe. And the remarkable thing was that Am I going too fast?
Yes, no. Proceed. I just want to be sure that everything is okay. Yes, it's okay.
Because one thing that none of us ever expected. Knowing the situation in Europe, we never expected, that certainly when we went into Germany, that we'd ever see another Jew. And it came as an overwhelming shock. It was almost traumatic to meet those who were still alive in Belsen.
Can you still make the differentiation between what you knew before arriving and what came a part of your knowledge after arriving? I mean, the name Belsen, what did it mean to you before arriving?
Didn't know of the name.
Didn't know of the name?
Never heard of it. None of us ever heard the name Belsen. But when news came, I was then serving with the headquarters of the British Army. And news came that they found a concentration camp called Bergen-Belsen. And to us it was terra incognita, never heard of it. And that's when the real trauma came, when I got into it and I saw the death camp. Because there were two camps. There was what we call the upper camp, which is now called Hona, where they were in a better condition. Whereas in the death camp, it was appalling. I mean, it's impossible to describe. I felt like Aharon standing ben Chaim u'ben Amiti. I went into a hut, and I didn't know whether they were alive or whether they were dead, because they were lying there. I talked to people, and as I talked to them, they died. I tried to draw up a list of survivors in the first few days. I went from hut to hut, making their names, where do you come from, what is your name? And by the time I wrote the list was already out of date because they were dead. And that was the situation. For the first 6 weeks, the camp existed. We tried to bring out as many as had possibility of survival. And the British medical authorities, the army medical authorities were fantastic. They took them out and they cleaned them and they washed them. In fact, they had what is called a human laundry. Soldiers would take, as a matter of fact, after the war, round the corner here was a barber, and I went in to have a haircut one day, and he recognized me, and they told me that he was in the human laundry, and I said, how did you do it? He said, we didn't know whether it didn't make any difference whether they were men or women. They were like skeletons with a bit of skin on them. They washed them and they deloused them, gave them clean clothes, and then transferred them to an area which was a sort of large hospital. Mm-hmm. And we buried something in the region of 21,000 corpses. There were those mass graves. Mm-hmm. So they threw them in, and we stood there, we said Kaddish, and we moved away.
Just a moment, said Kaddish. Most of the survivors or those who died after the liberation were Jews. Have you any idea?
We didn't know who was Jewish and who weren't.
Did it occur to you that the question did occur? I mean,
No, my impression was that the survivors that we met,
yes,
that we could talk to, were Jews, because they said so immediately. And their one concern was La'an. We had a remarkable collection of young women who came from Carpatha, Russia, Munkac. I spoke Hebrew. And we had an Onyx Shabbat on one occasion, inside this death camp. And their one concern was, Eretz Yisrael, no other place to go to.
Hebrew was one of the languages, and Yiddish, did you speak
Yiddish? Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Of a sort.
Yes.
So I called it Kongressdeutsch, but it was Yiddish also.
Yeah.
But we understood each other. There was more than language. It was heart to heart. You understand the feeling, the emotion of mixing, talking to these people.
You were not the only Jewish chaplain in the British Army then.
No, there was one other, a man named Harman,
Yes.
Leslie Harman. He was there.
From Leeds.
Originally from Leeds, he's now in London. Mm-hmm. He came in 2 or 3 days before me, but I'm afraid, this is, as the German says, unter uns gesagt, Beinenu and Smenu, after a few weeks I had to have him removed because he became too emotionally involved. That's off the record. I don't want to do any reflection on him because it was a very emotional. You had to have nerves of steel to be able to stand up to this. And it was whilst I was sort of in and out of the camp that I received a message from the chief of staff of the army. He had seen me there and he said, "You obviously need some help." And he was very considerate. And he said, "How many chaplains do you need to help you?" And I said, off my head, 5. And they sent 5 civilian rabbis over who were not a very great success.
Can you mention names?
I can mention one name because he was the only one that really did a good job. And that was Rabbi Dr. Eli Munk.
I was assuming because I came across the names of Vilensky and other names, and Munk made an impression of me.
Munk did a very good job. Vilensky, well, again, I don't want to say too much about him because...
there is documented that there were many problems with him, and he was sent back sometime. But what exactly the problems were, I didn't know.
Well, do you have to know?
Oh, I mean, it's part of the story.
Vilensky...
I mean, they were sent by the chief rabbinate, or how?
Well, the army got in touch with the chief rabbi in London.
There was a request from the army.
Yeah.
It was not the initiative of the rabbinate.
No. It was the army, the British army, the chief of staff of the army, who asked me what I wanted, and then the War Office got in touch in London with the chief rabbinate, and he selected these people. They were all civilians. Munk was then a rabbi in Golders Green. Vilensky, I think, came from the provinces, and there was another Hasidic Rebbe who came from Stamford Hill, whose name I've forgotten.
I have a few names here, just a moment. Baumgarten,
that's a Hasidic. That's the one who wanted a mikveh built in Belsen.
Yes.
Elton?
And Greenbaum?
No.
Lebo?
No.
These are the names that I...
Then there's a man named Elton.
What about Goldfinger? Ben Yeshaya?
I think he came later. You see, I left Belsen in end of 1945.
Yes.
What happened after that?
Yes.
And various things happened.
Yes.
No, but Baumgarten was a little Hasidic rebel whose one concern was they want to get married and therefore there must be a mikveh. That was his first concern. Vilensky was playing tricks. First of all, he was playing with the black market. And then he wasn't particularly kind to those who said, "We want to go to Israel, to Palestine." And he said, "Stay here, don't go." And they very nearly killed him. So we put him under house arrest until such time as we sent him back. And he came back and he opened a hotel as a result of the money he made on the black market. That was the kind of mensch we had to deal with. But Munk, although Yossele Rosensaft, who you've known, Yossele used to say, "Der Jesuit." But actually he did a very good job. And he was very conscientious.
He was a Buddha?
Who?
Monk?
I don't know. He belonged to the sort of I suppose of the Aguda type.
Yeah.
But that didn't matter. As far as he did a wonderful job. He worked with Shem Shemaim. There's no question.
Yeah.
No question. I give him full marks. And he did a very good job. And he was respected by the people. Except Yossele Rosensaft, who didn't like rabbis. But anyhow. But that was the sort of situation. And then, of course, once the death camp was destroyed, they brought in flamethrowers, they burnt it down. The survivors moved over to the upper camp, which was the German Wehrmacht barracks,
Yes.
where we had an enormous hospital run by a man whom I can still remember with great affection, a Brigadier Glyn Hughes. They opened the Glyn Hughes Hospital. Glyn Hughes was one of these Chasidei Umot HaOlam, no question. He continued to maintain contact with survivors of Belsen until the day he died. And he left in his will that if there was to be a memorial service of any sort, a prayer should be recited for the survivors of Belsen. And if I am available, I should do it. And we had a service in a parish church in London, and Natalie tribute paid to him. And I composed a prayer for the occasion, a copy of which I sent to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
That was the sort of man who was Glyn Hughes, wonderful man, who really, he felt that the survivors were part of his life. And that's quite exceptional, quite exceptional.
Yeah.
But we had a number of problems. Now that the war was over and the death camp was destroyed, then we had political problems. I'm not mentioning Yossele Rosensaft because you got full record of what his activities.
No, I shall nevertheless, because one of the questions that we don't know really the answer for it is how did he become the president, the leader of the camp?
Yossele Rosensaft, who was this high, he was dynamic. He was, as far as the Germans were concerned, he was indestructible. He was sent from one bunker to another, and he survived. And when he arrived in Belsen, the first thing, and he was not in the death camp, he was up in the barracks.
He arrived to Belsen only a week before its liberation, so...
Maybe, I don't know when he arrived, but I saw him in the upper camp. And he was already a macher.
You met him on the first day that you arrived?
When I arrived in Belsen, I didn't go into the death camp, I went into the barracks.
Yes.
And there I saw the survivors.
Yes.
And I was the first British officer that they had seen in the barracks, a Jewish British officer.
Yes.
And Yossele immediately organized a parade. And I found that they had made a little Magen David in blue and white out of paper, which they sort of pinned on their clothes. And it was all parade, you know, and they were Am Yisrael Chai attitude, you know.
Yeah.
And I was very moved by this. And then I realized that this was not the Belsen death camp. And so from there I went a kilometer or two down to the death camp, and there things began to move from that point. So that when the death camp was destroyed, everybody went back into the barracks. And there Yossele reigned supreme. He only spoke Yiddish, and when he went to speak to the commanding officer, the commandant of the camp, he spoke Yiddish. And he had to have an interpreter, and his foreign minister you've met, Norbert Wollheim, I always called him Yossele's foreign minister. And Norbert did a very good job, because he spoke good English, and spoke German, and I understood Yiddish because somehow he didn't. And there things began to, problems arose. First of all, the British wanted to clear the camp, get rid of these displaced persons. So if there were French Jews, back to France. Hungarians, back to Hungary. And we were left with a solid block of Jews from Poland, who said under no circumstances to be killed. One young boy of 16 once said to me, he's gay foreign. I said, where are you going? He's going back home, see if there's anything there. He went back to Poland and he came back to Belsen. I said, what did you find? He said, I found nothing with my family, but I found a new way to go across Germany. And that's when the underground, the Bricha started to move across Germany.
Were there many like these boys that went only to back in order to find the relatives or
Not
to
that
see
I knew
what,
of. This was just one exceptional
yes,
case that
yes.
I became. You see, there were so many thousands of them. And
Yes.
I didn't know all of them, obviously.
Yes, of course.
Then the situation became a little critical because a Polish liaison officer attached to the British Army appeared in Belsen and said, "These are Polish citizens. We must have them back into Poland." And they tried to separate them, so they sent a group of them to another camp, a place called Lingen, I can remember. And I went across to see what it was like. It was appalling. And I came back and I reported that these people are not going to stay in Lingen, and they must be brought back to Belsen to remain with their own people. They are not Polish citizens any longer. They are Staatenlos, right? And therefore they stay until such time as they go to the place they want to go, which was of course Palestine. I came back to London briefly.
When was it? Can you remember the...
I can't remember the exact date. It was all in 1945,
Yes,
after the
yes.
liberation. This was only a matter of months since I was in focus. I came back to London and I got an introduction to the High Commissioner for Refugees. His name, I think, was MacDonald. I can't remember. And I came back and I pleaded with him. I said, "Look, these are young people who have survived. There's only one place they can go to. They want to go to. You can't leave them there to rot. There's only one place. They want to go to Palestine, and facilities should be granted." And all he says, "I'm terribly sorry. But it's a question of certificates." The old story. And I said to him as I left, I said to him, "I want to warn you, if I were to go back to Belsen and say to these young people that you cannot go to Palestine, I may find them hanging from the rafters of their huts. They would commit suicide rather than stay in the camp." It made no difference. Because it was the British mandate all over again. See? So you can have a lot of sympathy, but the doors were locked. The only possibility was the underground. And of course, thanks to the Jewish Brigade, who then came in after I left, they were stationed in Belgium, as you know.
Yes.
I think they were in Antwerp. When they sent representatives into Belsen, the first thing they did was to arrange for the...
But can you remember at least two of them arrived already about August or July, even July 1945? Can you remember? Arnon?
I can't remember.
No.
I didn't see them.
No.
I didn't see them.
No, I know for sure that they arrived already before
They could
the
have
end of 1945, and even one of them, Littmann, helped to establish the gymnasium in Belsen.
Not in 1945. Not when I was there in 1945. No, the schools that were opened by Hort sent in a kid. They had a group of relief team, Jewish relief team
Yes.
came in, and they opened the school, so the children were and of course some of the children were sent, we got them off to his Hadassah Rosensaft.
Yes.
Did a good job in there.
Yes.
But this was more or less after I left the camp, because I came out of the army in November 1945. So all this was intense work during this short period from April to November. But the one thing that, from the British point of view, which struck me as being very significant, they were completely unprepared for what they saw, which was natural. Secondly, when they had a British commandant in the camp, he didn't realize the kind of people he was dealing with. I'll give you one silly example that stuck me in my memory ever since. He called me up one day and said, "Do you know what these women are doing? they are destroying War Office property. I said, what do you mean? He said they are taking War Office blankets and cutting them up and making dresses out of them. How did he know? They didn't know that W.O. on the blanket went War Office, and right in the middle of the dress at the back was W.O. So I said, a terrible thing, isn't it? These women who have been deprived of all their femininity. So you're going to make an issue of this? But this was his attitude. War Office property. Had no understanding whatsoever. Whereas on the other hand, I'll give you an example. When I used to have to rush backwards and forwards, I was attached to Army headquarters, and we were on the move all the time. So I used to go into Belsen, out of Belsen, in Belsen, out of Belsen. When I used to come back to the officers' mess, the officers crowded around me. They called me the Beast of Belsen, because I used to report back to them. They said, what's happening? What did you see? They were so anxious to know. And to my great surprise, one young officer wrote home to somewhere in the country, Yorkshire, saying he'd heard what was happening in Belsen, though he hadn't seen it. And I had said, I'd like these women to be women again. So I'd like needles, cotton, wool, knitting needles, a little bit of cosmetics to make these women come to life. And as a result, I got a large parcel. And attached to each little parcel a gift. This comes to you from a well-wisher who doesn't know you. From a little place up in Yorkshire. Which was, I thought, was a nice. This is on the one hand you get the strict military regime, on the other you get the human sympathy displayed. And this was very moving, very touching. Excuse me. Yes, dear. Yes.
Yeah, about the British attitude.
Yeah. So it was very mixed. You see, from what I saw of the higher ranks of the army, like the chief of staff, who was very concerned that something should be done, the medical staff were marvelous. They really appreciated this was what a situation it was. But some of these who were like the commandant, who really didn't understand. He was probably a regular army officer, and he knew that this has got to be done. It was called working by the book, the rules, the rule book.
Can you still remember there was a distinctive British policy which tried not to discriminate between Jews and non-Jews. And although the Jewish leaders were demanding the segregation of Jews from, let's say, the Polish Jews from the Polish, or the Hungarian Jews from the Hungarian, the British authorities didn't let it to be. They wanted the organization of the camp according to the camp and the nationality. And the argument was that they do not want to follow the Nazi discrimination according to religion or race. Only the nationality is that according to which it
well, I must tell you that I never saw it, for one very good reason, that the people who really began to organize themselves were the Jews. Yossel Rosensaft and his crowd. And they became an organized body inside the camp.
Yes.
If there were any non-Jews, I don't suppose for one moment the non-Jews would have stayed there very long. They would have wanted to leave. If there were opportunities to leave, they would have left. But the Jews refused to leave.
They didn't want to go. There were a hard core of non-Jews who refused to go back to their nation states, like Polish and others.
Well, all I can say is I never met them.
It didn't occur to you that there is any other organized body of...
all I was concerned with, and all I saw were Jews.
Yes, I see.
Non-Jews wouldn't have come to me.
It's an interesting answer. I mean, it makes sense, yes.
Yes, because I went there as a Jew looking for Jews. And when I saw there was an organization of Jews that Yossel had organized, they were the spokesmen, as it were, for the Jewish, for the Jews in them. There was one other thing I must mention to you which strikes me as, I don't know whether it's on record. When I came back briefly to London to report back to the lay community, and I addressed a meeting at the House of Rothschild, they all pleaded that they didn't know anything about it, this was all news to them, which infuriated me. How could they not know? And I was very upset by this, because I felt that the news must have got through to them. And the other thing which upset me very much was the then Chief Rabbi, Dr. Hertz, had a son-in-law by the name of Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schoenfeld, who was his spokesman and organized the Chief Rabbi's Religious Emergency Fund.
Yes.
And they were concerned to send supplies, sort of kosher supplies, into the camp. And at a meeting I organized, that I attended, I was furious when I heard that they were making distinction between the Datiim and the Lo Datiim. And Schoenfeld got very cross, and he said, and he was a good friend of mine, I liked him very much, but in this we disagreed. He said, I am only concerned with the Yiddish Gemeinde inside the camp. Who are they? The Frummers, those who, he said, those who don't go out stealing like other people do. They sit and they learn and they daven. And he wants to make a distinction between the religious and the non-religious. Yossel, of course, was completely anti-religious. And I got very angry. I said, Hitler made no distinction between religious and non-religious, and our concern is Jews irrespective of whether they're religious or non-religious. And we should not show privilege, give privileges to the so-called religious. But this was his stand.
And what was the outcome?
The outcome, he continued to send stuff to of course they had a few Hasidic rebbes who came into the camp somehow. You know how people wandered over Europe at that time. They didn't have passports, they didn't have to have passports, they wandered. They heard there was Jews in the camp, they came into the camp. And the British authorities couldn't control them. They all came into the camp and they had to be fed. But I refused to make any distinction. But this continued for some while.
Did the succeeded in having control on everything that came to the camp? I mean, he tried, he made the attempt, I don't know to what extent he succeeded in, having control on every allocating distribution of everything that was coming into the camp from outside.
I don't think he could control everything.
No.
Look, there was
he was trying to do it.
I know, but there were a lot of people who went out to the camp and they took what they could. You know, Magia Lam. So much so that at one meeting we held, I said to them, look, when you leave here, and please God you go to Eretz Yisrael, what you call taking what's due to you, that's stam gneva. And if you go to Israel and you do that sort of thing, who will be you stealing from? Achenu b'nei Yisrael. Stop it now. Don't get into the habit. They thought it was a big joke. Because here, there, the Germans are living fairly comfortably, and we're in a camp. Why shouldn't we take what's due to us? I can understand their mentality, but it was a dangerous policy.
There were many who tried to leave the camp in order to settle, even temporarily, to settle in villages or cities around the camp.
I wouldn't know at that time.
No.
At that time,
maybe later.
I know what happened later on. I went back to Germany for the consecration of the International Memorial of Belsen,
Yes.
with President Heuss presiding. And we had a Lutheran, a Roman Catholic, and I. We all said a little bit. I read a Tehillim of some sort. And then I noticed that the group of people assembled at Belsen, some of them come back to settle in Germany.
Yes.
One man in particular, whose name I've forgotten, but he was a very successful lawyer, and he came back to open up his practice in Germany. And how these people could go back to Germany, I don't know. But they had not been in the Belsen concentration. They'd left Germany before, in the early days of Hitler. They came back. And there were Jews who came back, as we know. And of course, one of the things which I only heard of was that the terrible thing was that many of these displaced persons who ultimately settled at a place like Frankfurt am Main weren't behaving strictly according to the rules.
Yes.
You know, the black market and the brothels and things like that. You've heard about this, I don't have to tell you.
Yes.
Which wasn't very pleasant.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to yourself. What after the first days that you, the first thing that you had to struggle with was burials of thousands of deaths. After the first emergency days that you had, what was then your main activity? Or what did you think then to be your main role?
My role then was to give as much moral support to Yossel, because I had to work with Yossel. It was the only organization that looked after the Jews. And to be a sort of almost a political liaison officer with the authorities to try and prevent them from sending these Jews away to countries they didn't want to go.
Yes.
So that it was largely a question of maintaining the morale of the people concerned, and B, acting as wherever possible as an intermediary with the authorities. It wasn't I didn't serve a religious capacity. You know what that means?
Yes.
Because that wasn't my concern. My concern was more or less to see that the people could survive properly. For those who were sick, we also unfortunately had a few burials too of those who in hospital who didn't survive. But the numbers were very few, thank God, in those days. But I was much more concerned with the political situation. I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
I was present at the time when Earl Harrison came over on a mission, and Yossel couldn't very well speak to him in a language he understood, and I acted as their spokesman. And I can remember exactly what I said to Earl Harrison. And that was, I recalled to him what was written on the base of the, what is it called? You know, the big statue of New York. You know, as you come, the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
I said, there's a poem at the foot of it. I said, about giving us back your weary ones. So these are the weary ones. I said, the gates were closed when they needed to be open. Now, what are you going to do with these people?
And did he use your words in his
I don't
report?
know. I don't know. All I know is that I felt I had to speak out for people. And that was part of my, it wasn't my job.
Yes.
But
what was your job, actually? You came as a chaplain, okay, but
I came primarily as a chaplain to the British Army.
Yes, and then when the war was over, and you still stayed in...
I still stayed,
what
because
was your...
when if I didn't go to Belsen, I would be going visiting the Jewish soldiers. But I sent out a note to all the Jewish soldiers I knew of, and I said, from now on, don't expect me to look after you. I've got another job to do.
Yes.
And I want you to send me whatever you can spare. So they sent me their cigarette ration and their chocolate rations, which I distributed in the camp. That was the sort of reaction of our Jewish boys.
Yes.
Of course, they were all very much involved in emotion because they heard about it, of course, but they couldn't get anywhere near them. And so they sent me their rations.
Yes, and
Which was a nice
the British command they didn't knew about it, or it was officially that you could work for your people, or did you do it unofficially?
Continue. I'll give you some another example. In between this, my going in and out of Bilson, I had occasion to go to Berlin. Again, I wanted to see if there were any Jews there. And I found a remnant of Jews in what is now the Russian zone, what the Russian zone.
Yes.
And I went there, and they had a service on a Shabbat in the remains of a synagogue. I've forgotten which one it was. And I said to them, I am leaving here tomorrow morning. If any of you have any letters that you want to send to any relative anywhere in the world, I will collect them tomorrow morning. Because I had arranged to send any letters for anybody in England, to the World Jewish Congress in London, to South Africa, anywhere. These letters were distributed. I sent them out. A few weeks later, I got a message that the chief chaplain to the army had to see me. What happened was that military intelligence had intercepted a letter which went to Switzerland, in which it said that if they want to reply, they should send their letter to me, and I will see who gets it. And the British, the intelligence reported that I was intervening, breaking the law. The chief chaplain called me up and said, by what right are you doing this? And I said to him, he said, this is military secrets that you might be in. I said, what military secrets have these people got who've just been liberated from the Germans? Their one concern is to make contact with their nearest of kin, which may be a second cousin because there's no one else. I got very angry with him. I said, so what have they written? I am alive. Is that a military secret? So when I calmed down, he said to me, the trouble with you, Levy, is you're a Jewish nationalist. It's a terrible thing. A Jewish nationalist, because I'm concerned about Jews. So I said to me, what was their reaction? As far as my going in and out of Belsen, nobody raised any queries. Nobody said this is beyond your control. Because I could report back that the Chief of Staff said, do you want help? So there was no question. I could do what I liked as far as that was concerned. And so I was much more concerned. Et achai anochi mevakesh. I mean, that was the whole attitude. Where do I find Jews? And to see that there were Jews who'd come back from Theresienstadt to Berlin, and though they say we've survived. That was all I was concerned with. And then on the VE Day, as it was called, the European Day, I held a service in Hamburg. And I had to look for a place where I could get the British soldiers to collect. So who do I go to? The Burgermeister, who wasn't there, but his deputy was there. And I said to him, in my best German, wo sind die Synagogues? All of them were bombed by the British. I said, were they? Haben Sie vielleicht von Kristallnacht gehört? And he went green in the face. I knew what I was talking to. Anyhow, I found it. I got no satisfaction out of Hamburg, the authorities. Obviously, they were afraid to say anything. There were no records kept of Jews, of course. They all were destroyed in the war by British bombs, always British bombs.
Yes, yes.
And so we had a service in Hamburg, and that was that. But this was a sort of attitude. I had very little connection with Germans as such.
The service was for the
British
soldiers.
It was sort of a Victory Day service.
Yes, and do you remember, did other Jews attend the service from Hamburg, Jews who were settling in Hamburg?
No, this was only for the army,
Uh-huh.
purely for military.
Uh-huh.
No, the military and the civilians didn't mix in that respect.
Yes.
But the military would only mix with the civilians. I mean, if Jews could meet Jews,
Yes.
but or they had any connection, military connection with them, if they had to use civilian accommodation or something.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, there was no connection.
Yeah, I see.
Of course, you see, we were given an order. Again, this is another reflection. We were given an order. There must be no fraternization with Germans.
Yeah. Non-fraternization.
No fraternization. This came from Montgomery and Company. And I remember distinctly writing to my senior chaplain, the late Rabbi Brodie in London, saying that I'm very concerned, in spite of the non-fraternization order, we know that British soldiers are going with German Fräuleins, and they will be mentally affected and indoctrinated, and there will be an increase in venereal disease, the like of which we haven't seen. And I sent a copy of that to my local chief chaplain, Goy. He was furious with me. What right have you got to complain about an order which comes from the commander-in-chief? You will write to your London and ask them, I wrote to Brodie to say, bring this to the notice of the War Office. Brodie didn't reply to me, but I was told that I had to write to him cancelling the previous letter. So what I did was I wrote it, tore up the original, and gave the local chaplain general a copy, as if I had done it. But nothing came of it. But years later, that same chief complained about the increase in venereal disease among the British. And I felt like saying, I told you so. But it didn't work, it didn't make any difference. And this is the sort of thing we do.
Yes. So you actually didn't act in service of religious supplies also for the Jewish DPs in Belgium. I mean, for looking after. No,
I didn't have any supplies.
No, I mean not only supplies. Let's say as a rabbi making chuppah v'kiddushim and
well, there was a
bar mitzvahs or whatever.
No, I tell you, the one problem which was
or for Hagim, for supplying the.
I must just tell you one thing. Yes. I have to go soon.
Yes.
I must tell you one thing. I had this problem. A man would come to me with a woman, in amongst the DPs, and they would say, I want to marry her. And I said, were you married before? Yes. She was married before, yes. So, where is your wife? Where is your former husband? We were in Auschwitz. I went to the left, my wife went to the right. She is no longer alive. And the woman would say the same thing. And I was in a quandary. What do I do? I would like to marry. Why not? They have a right to live again. I wrote to London, to the London Beddi, and I put this Charlotte to them. They wrote back and said, no action should be taken until such time as we have complete records of all survivors. So I said, that's nonsense. That can take years. And what guarantee that you'll have a complete list? So what happened? A man comes to me, and You understand Yiddish, I'm
Yes.
sure. He has a little piece of paper. Ich, Reuven ben Shimon, nem Zorah beschrijf als Weib. Signed, 2 witnesses. I said, Mazel tov. As far as I'm concerned, you're a married couple. You don't need chuppah, you don't need kiddushin, right? And that's how it worked. Didn't happen very often. But then came this Rabbi Baumgarten who said, until such time as we have a mikveh, we can't have any chuppah kiddushin. Well, we had difference of opinion.
Yes, Norbert Vollheim told me a story about
Yes,
this,
he did, yes.
the mikveh, a mikveh story. That,
yes. So this is corroboration.
Yes.
So that-
Have you any idea how many religious Orthodox Jews were among the survivors? Some percentage
Impossible.
or impossible? Were there many, or it was only a very tiny group?
I think it was a tiny group, but then more may have come in after I left.
Yes.
Listen, I was not bodek tzitziot.
No, I mean because of the different. I have many different reports about the composition of the Jewish of the social demographic
Yes, I realize.
composition of the survivors.
I didn't make it my business to ask
Yes.
questions as to whether you're religious, whether you're
No,
not
but
religious.
there is
Because in
some,
those early days, there was only one concern, that is to survive. Later on, we had people came in. There was some Hasidic Rebbe or something who arrived. I wouldn't have known the Hasidic Rebbe. He didn't have a beard. He didn't have peyot. You know, I couldn't tell what he looked like, and I had no connection with him. I was only I was concerned, as it were, on the upper political level,
Yes.
to get things organized as best I could.
Were you involved in Zionist activities inside the camp?
My only Zionist activity was to try and get these people to Israel.
Yeah.
That was my one concern.
Yes.
I didn't need Zionist propaganda with these people. They could tell me more than I could tell them. You understand what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, like these young girls who came from Munkach, they were Hebrew speaking, been to a Zionist gymnasium.
Yes.
I mean, what? Right?
There was already a Zionist background.
Oh, sure.
Many young people, many...
Of the younger element, yes.
Yes, I have found, interesting enough, a letter of Hashomer HaTzair, a member, one of the survivors, who attached to his letter a list of about 200 members of Hashomer HaTzair who were among those who were liberated in Bergen-Belsen. Only Hashomer HaTzair, 200, a list of 200. So this, and he wrote that there were about 900 youth movement members among the survivors. So it makes
Could
some...
well be. I wouldn't have known at that time. See, I was in the very early days when things were very chaotic.
Yes. I'm speaking only on the early days.
Sure.
Yes. Just a moment. Yeah. So maybe this will be one of my last questions. There were many complaints, and you can read it over and over again from survivors as well as from people like you yourself, that there were no shalichim coming, not from England, not from any place else, and one of the most ununderstandable phenomena was that except for the chaplains and from the rabbis who were coming, according to what you have told me, no one was coming until about the first who arrived were the relief unit members who came through Holland to Germany.
This is true. What happened was this: the first relief team to come into Belsen were Quakers. Right? And amongst them was one Jewish woman with whom I'm still in contact. She was named Jane Leveson, who became Mrs. Levy, a relation of mine. Jane Leveson. She was the only Jewish woman in the first Quaker team.
Yes.
I heard that there was a Jewish relief team in Rotterdam.
Yes.
And I rushed down to Brussels, to the headquarters, the civil administration headquarters, and said, look, we need help. These people are dying. And there was one officer there who showed me a map. He said, you see all these marks on the map? These are all camps which have been opened. As far as we're concerned, this is an academic problem. This is an academic problem. At which I went raving mad. I said, you are sitting here on your backside in Brussels, enjoying the luxuries of life, and these people are dying? If you don't get that team out from Rotterdam to Belsen, I will report you to the general in charge of the forces in Belsen. Well, whether it was because of this, I lost my temper or not, but they came. The Jewish relief team came, and they stayed, and they worked very hard in the Jewish relief team.
In the letters that I have given to you, you are crying for help.
Sure.
Yes, and there was no reaction. Yes.
That's right.
So what about why was it so that the British Jewish organizations, until they started,
they had to get permission from the military authorities to send civilians into the camp. It was a question of perhaps a concern with security or whatever it was.
But the very same authorities did let the rabbis get into the camp.
That's a different thing. That's a different thing. But when it came to a relief team, that was a different department. That was civil administration, not military. You see, there was a peculiar difference. Civil administration were the people who, they were military, but they were to look after the local administration once the place had been opened. But in a camp like Belsen, where the first concern was medical, to see how many people could survive, once it became a DP question, there was a different story. A DP question meant semi-political, because separating the various nationalities. And frankly, I don't think, I must be very honest, I don't believe even the Jewish community in this country realized what the situation was. That's what I mentioned when I spoke to this meeting at a new court at the headquarters of Rothschilds. They didn't appreciate what it was all about. As a matter of fact, my wife used to show my letters to her to the Zionist Federation head office, because we had a very dear friend there by the name of Joseph Linton, who was Weizmann's blue-eyed boy. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you something else. I came to London, I went to see Chaim Weizmann, who was already getting on in years, and I explained to him what the situation was about. How can we get these people to Jesus? And I remember what he said to me, "Mein Kind, once upon a time, when I went to the Foreign Office, I went through the front door. Now I go through the back door. I felt there's somebody stuck in my foot." Chaim Weizmann could say to me that he was no longer recognized as the official spokesman. He had to go through the back door, not the front door. Yeah. Painful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you see, they felt helpless to this extent. It was only later on the Jewish community began to wake up, and then they began to send delegates, the Jewish Congress and other people started coming in. Colonel Janner came in and others came in order to report.
Can you remember the Congress held at Bergen-Belsen on September?
No, I wasn't there. It was after my time. After my time.
So you left even earlier.
I left November 14.
No, it was on September. The Congress was on the 25th, 27th of September.
Well, I wasn't there.
So maybe that you didn't attend.
No, well, I used to go around backwards and forwards. I might have been in Berlin at the time. But that was the situation. Chaotic.
Yeah. Could you please, first of all, have you left letters that you have, or letters or articles, copies of articles that you have written on that time that could be...
I wrote, the only article I wrote was that thing in the Jewish Chronicle. I didn't have time to write articles. Yes. I wasn't concerned about writing. I used to write to my wife, I can't remember where the letters are. She may have had them somewhere.
Sometimes the letters are the most authentic
I know.
source.
But these were anything very, but I can't remember now what I wrote.
Yes.
You see, I was soliciting, going backwards and forwards.
Yes.
It was a very painful period.
Yeah. And can you recommend some other persons that you think that are might be of help?
Well, I don't know who else can supplement. I mean, if you want to meet Harman, because he was there in the early days, and I tell you, he was very emotionally involved
Yes,
with it.
so he was only for a very short time.
In Belsen, yes, in the early days. There's Hardman. Who else?
Have you any connection with some of the survivors who are in London?
There's a Mrs. What was her name? Wolfish.
Yes.
Mrs. Wolfish. She was a survivor of Belsen. But she would only tell you about her personal experiences.
Yes.
I don't know where she lives. Oh, yes, there's one other
She's
person.
in London? She's in
London. Oh, I tell you.
Yes.
There's one man who will give you a lot of information because he was attached to the administration headquarters of Belsen. Dr. Arnold Orwell.
Dr. Arnold
Horwell. Horwell. Whose name originally was Horowitz. I knew him as Horowitz in the early days. Now, I can give you his telephone number.
Oh, that's fine.
He would give you more information, because he would give you information, particularly from the administration side of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how long he stayed in Belgium.
Yes.
He was there long after me. I'll just give it up.
Yes.